how do you genuinely evaluate a 250-year-old democratic experiment?
Right. That is a huge question.
It is, right. I mean, if you think about it, when we look back at history, especially the history of a global superpower like the United States, we usually do it from the inside out.
Oh, absolutely. We'd use the exact same cultural vocabulary that built the nation to critique it.
Exactly. But doing that is, a little like trying to proofread a highly emotional email you just wrote. You are so close to the text, so familiar with what you meant to say, that your brain just automatically fills in the missing words. It just skips right over the structural flaws.
Yeah, which is why you often need an external vantage point.
Hmm.
When you are standing inside the house, you just can't see the foundation settling.
Right.
You become blind to your own society's paradoxes because, well, they just look like the normal, everyday wallpaper of reality to you.
And providing that completely new vantage point is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. For you listening, we are unpacking a truly monumental project detailed in a new book by Peter Hans. It's called America at 250, The Complete Works of Prof. Dr. Milton Biswas.
Such a fascinating read.
It really is. This project takes the upcoming 250th anniversary of the U.S. and uses it as a catalyst to completely re-examine American history, culture, and institutions. But, and this is key, it does not do this the traditional way.
No, definitely not.
It uses a highly unique dual-lens approach. It combines South Asian post-colonial theory with cutting-edge artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and right out of the gate, we need to establish that this is not your standard chronological historical review. Biswas is attempting what academics call an epistemic disruption.
Okay, let me jump in right there, because epistemic disruption is a pretty heavy piece of academic jargon. What does that actually mean for the person listening to this on their morning commute?
Fair point, yeah. So epistemology is just the study of how we know what we know.
Yeah.
It's the frameworks we use to build truth. So an epistemic disruption means he is taking a sledgehammer to the default American framework of viewing its own history.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Instead of using traditional Western political science to study America, Biswas is merging Bengali literary traditions with massive, unprecedented AI data mining.
That is a wild combination.
Right. He's looking for the paradoxes of American democracy, its media, its civil rights struggles, and its healthcare system through a completely foreign lens. And beyond just the research, he is trying to fundamentally democratize how scholarly knowledge is accessed in the 21st century.
I love that. But before we get into the massive scope of the AI and the data, we really need to understand the mind that designed this project.
Yeah, you really do.
I mean, I want to understand how a scholar rooted in Bengal gets to the point where he's diagnosing the American democratic machine. Reading history is usually like looking at a painting through a very specific Western-tinted pair of glasses. Biswas basically decided to swap those glasses for a completely different prescription.
To understand that, you have to look at Biswas's origins. He grew up in rural Bangladesh during a time of intense post-colonial reconstruction.
Right.
This was a nation trying to rebuild its identity after centuries of British rule and subsequent political upheaval. And his own family dynamic was kind of a microcosm of that era.
How so?
Well, his father was an educator who was fiercely dedicated to preserving the Bengali language and cultural heritage. His mother, on the other hand, was a relentless champion for women's education, pulling in progressive narratives that reached far beyond their local borders.
So he is literally growing up at the intersection of deep historical tradition and radical social emancipation.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
From a very young age, he is absorbing the sweeping, deeply humanistic poetry of Rabindranath Tagore, right alongside passionate dinner table debates about post-colonial identity.
That's quite the childhood.
It really is. And that environment forged a very specific academic foundation. When he moved into higher education, he didn't just study literature as art.
Okay, so what did you do?
He started integrating Western critical theorists, thinkers, like Frantz Fanon and Edward Said, who wrote about how empires use language to control colonized people with Bengali literature, like the melancholy poetry of Jibananda Das, for example.
Mm.
He viewed these texts not just as static art, but as living sites of social power.
Okay, I have to push back here for a second.
That's for it.
It is a beautiful academic background, but how does analyzing poetry from Bengal actually qualify someone to decode the U.S. Constitution or American healthcare policy? I mean, it feels like we're jumping from studying a poem about a river in Bangladesh to like dissecting a global superpowers tax code.
Yeah, it does seem like a massive leap, but that leap is the core of his methodology. Biswas operates on the philosophy that cross-pollinating epistemologies Taking a way of thinking from one culture and applying it to another illuminates the blind spot.
Okay, I'm tracking.
Think of it this way. A poem by Jibananda Das is often about looking at a landscape and seeing the lost history, the voices that have been erased by time or conflict. Reading that poetry trains your brain to look for the ghosts, for what is missing from the official record.
Ah, okay. That is clicking for me now.
Right. So when a domestic historian reads the Declaration of Independence, they see a sacred founding document. But when Biswas reads it, his brain is trained by post-colonial theory to see a colonial negotiation document.
Wow, that's a huge shift in perspective.
Exactly. He automatically looks for the omissions, the ambivalences, and the contradictions. He is applying a framework born from South Asian struggles for independence to a nation that was born from a colonial struggle, but then morphed into an empire itself.
Okay, I see.
He spots the exclusions that an American historian is culturally conditioned to just gloss over.
That makes a lot of sense. He's looking at the American narrative of, like, liberty and justice for all and asking, okay, who was conveniently left out of the definition of all? But here is the logistical nightmare, right? Having a unique perspective is great for a single essay. But analyzing 250 years of an entire nation's history, tracking legislation, media, and culture, that requires processing power way beyond human limits. I mean, it would take 1,000 scholars, 1,000 lifetimes to read the source material.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of the project, because Biswas didn't do this alone. He built a triad methodology, 3 pillars working together.
Okay, what are the pillars?
First, textual criticism, which is the traditional close reading of documents. Second, cultural studies, which maps the broader power dynamics and lived experiences. And the third pillar, the engine of the whole thing, is computational analysis.
The artificial intelligence.
Exactly.
And the source text is very clear that this isn't just them doing advanced keyword searches on Google. They had to build this database from the ground up using custom optical character recognition, or OCR, pipelines.
Yeah, just imagine trying to get a computer to read a fragile, brittle newspaper clipping from 1912.
I can't even imagine. The ink is probably totally faded.
The ink is faded, the paper is yellowed, and the typeface is some archaic font where the letters looks like an F. Standard software just scrambles that into complete gibberish.
Right.
So Biswas's team had to train machine learning models, specifically on thousands of historical examples, just so the AI could accurately digitize handwritten manuscripts, old legislative bills, and audiovisual media.
But wait, here's where it gets really interesting, because this brings up a massive red flag. Anyone who has played around with modern AI knows it can, hallucinate.
Oh, definitely.
It will confidently invent a historical event or a court case that never happened. Or at the very least, an AI acts like a giant, soulless calculator that just flattens out all the historical nuance into cold data points. How did Biswas prevent the AI from just flattening out all the historical nuance and ruining the interpretive depth?
What's fascinating here is that this was his biggest hurdle, and his solution was to completely reframe the relationship with the technology. He treats the AI not as an oracle, but as what he calls an empathic collaborator.
An empathic collaborator. I mean, that sounds a little bit like marketing speak.
I know it does, but the mechanism behind it is actually fascinating. Think of the AI as a brilliant but incredibly literal-minded research assistant.
Okay.
If you just send this assistant into an archive and say, find me stuff about freedom, they will bring back a total mess. So Biswas and his team elevated prompt engineering to a rigorous intellectual craft. They built what they call context engines.
Wait, how does a context engine actually work in practice? Like, give me an example.
Sure. Let's take the 1963 March on Washington and Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech.
Okay, classic text.
Right. A standard AI parses the text, recognizes words like freedom and dream, and just outputs a summary. But Biswas's context engine doesn't analyze the document in a vacuum. It builds a massive dynamic knowledge graph around it.
So it's pulling in other sources simultaneously.
Exactly. It forces the AI to cross-reference that speech with the contemporaneous Civil Rights Act drafts, with how local southern U.S. newspapers were reporting the event versus how the Soviet press was reporting it to mock American democracy, and even with anti-colonial movements happening in Africa at the exact same moment.
Wow, so they put incredibly strict, historically dense guardrails on the AI, forcing it to interpret the text within a massive, multifaceted matrix of history.
Precisely. It minimizes hallucinations because the AI is bound by this interlocking web of verified historical metadata.
Okay, so we have this incredibly powerful, culturally nuanced, technological magnifying glass. Let's pivot and look at what it actually uncovered about the American experiment.
Yes, the findings are incredible.
The source text dives into three major areas: Hollywood, civil rights, and institutional paradoxes. Let's start with American media. What did the AI find there?
So Hollywood is a perfect example of what this AI can expose. The data proves that Hollywood is not just in the business of entertainment. It operates as a massive, globally distributed vehicle for soft power.
Soft power being the ability to influence others through culture rather than military force, right?
Exactly. And the dominant narrative Hollywood exports is the aspirational myth of the American melting pot, right? The idea that anyone can come to America, assimilate, and
Oh, that
succeed.
is a huge trope.
Yes, but the AI sentiment mapping, which analyzes the emotional tone of thousands of scripts and films over decades, caught a persistent contradiction. While Hollywood pushes this multicultural vibrancy, it relies on deeply reductive tropes.
What kind of tropes?
Well, the data mapped a fascinating toggle switch when it comes to immigrant characters. They almost exclusively oscillate between two extremes.
Okay.
They're either framed as heroic assimilationists who completely shed their past to adopt American values, or they're framed as threatening unassimilable others.
Wow, so there's very little space allowed for simply existing between those two poles. And because these movies are globally commodified, that binary shapes how the rest of the world understands American identity, which actually flows right into his findings on the real history of civil rights and immigration. Using these digital archives, the project maps shifts in public rhetoric, and what's striking is the cyclical nature of it all.
It is incredibly cyclical. The AI tracked the public and legislative rhetoric from the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882 all the way up to modern debates over DACA.
DACA being the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals policy, which protects undocumented immigrants brought to the U.S. as children.
Right, and when you look at 1882 and the modern era side by side through the AI's data, the specifics change, but the underlying mechanisms are identical.
Really, that's kind of sobering.
It is. The AI maps how America historically has periods where it desperately needs cheap labor, so borders become porous and rhetoric softens. But as soon as economic anxiety rises, the rhetoric immediately snaps back to xenophobia and exclusion.
So it's a constant push and pull.
Yeah, the boundaries of who gets to be considered an American are constantly renegotiated.
Yeah.
It is not a straight line of moral progress. It is a constant mechanical cycle of expansion and contraction.
You know, what strikes me about this is that he's not wagging a finger or making a partisan attack here. The math just impartially shows how the system functions over time.
Exactly, it's just data.
And that systemic function is deeply embedded in America's institutions, which brings us to the paradox Biswas found in the healthcare system.
Right, so the computational analysis of U.S. healthcare and education highlighted a profound structural contradiction. The United States possesses world-class cutting-edge medical technology. The innovation is undeniable.
Absolutely.
Yet the system suffers from massive inequities fueled by race, class, and highly fragmented policies.
The source text dives into the reliance on employer-based health insurance as the prime example of this, didn't it?
It did. The AI tracked the downstream effects of this specific policy. Employer-based insurance really took off during World War II as a way for companies to attract workers during wage freezes.
So it was just a historical accident.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
But Biswas' data shows how, over 80 years, that specific policy intentionally routed high-quality care toward specific corporate demographics, while systematically excluding marginalized groups who were historically barred from those types of jobs.
So to put it in a functional way, it's like discovering that America built a massive, state-of-the-art municipal plumbing system. The water inside is the purest, most technologically advanced water in the world.
Right.
But if you look at the blueprints, the pipes were intentionally routed to bypass entire neighborhoods. The data doesn't care about the political arguments defending the plumbing. It just points out who is dying of thirst.
That is a very apt way to look at it. The methodology is strictly data-driven, highlighting the gap between stated democratic ideals and the structural realities mapped across 250 years of records.
But here's the thing. Uncovering all this incredible data, processing it through an empathic AI, finding these patterns, it is completely useless if it just sits in some elitist academic journal behind a $100 paywall.
100%.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most impactful aspect of Biswas's work, his radical approach to publishing and digital outreach.
This is where Biswas's philosophy truly materializes. He believes that knowledge must be a shared intellectual commons. He completely rejects the legacy model of locking scholarship behind university subscriptions.
So what did he do instead?
He established an open access master repository. Anyone, anywhere in the world can access this entire digital archive for free.
But he didn't just dump a massive folder of complex PDFs online and expect people to figure it out, right? Because that
Yeah.
doesn't really democratize anything.
No, he is actively reaching people where they already spend their time. For
Mhm.
instance, he runs 5 distinct, heavily optimized YouTube channels.
And you listening might ask, why 5?
Right, because one size does not fit all in education. These
Yeah.
aren't just dry lectures recorded on a webcam.
Yep.
One channel is dedicated to high-production, documentary-style videos exploring Bengali literature and post-colonial theory for general audience. But another channel is strictly highly technical tutorials for digital humanists who want to learn exactly how to use AI for text mining their own archives.
So he is democratizing the tools themselves, not just the findings.
Exactly.
And the way they handled audiobooks blew my mind. They meticulously produce audiobooks of critical texts, but they didn't just hire a voice actor to read them. Can you explain the mechanism of how these audiobooks actually function?
Yeah, so they used advanced voice modulation technologies and sound engineering to capture the emotional resonance of the works. But functionally, they built a synchronized learning tool.
How does that work?
As you listen to the audio, the text highlights on your screen, and there are embedded interactive glossaries. So, if a visually impaired student or a non-native English speaker hits a dense academic term, the audio interface can seamlessly provide the definition without breaking the flow of the narrative.
It's an incredible pedagogical design meant to actively dismantle barriers to entry.
It really is.
And so what does this all mean for the future? Because this leads to my biggest worry about this entire project. Digital technology changes incredibly fast. Formats die out, websites crash. Think about how many links from the early 2000s just lead to dead pages now.
Well, I know, it's a huge problem.
How does Biswas ensure this massive, unprecedented digital archive doesn't just evaporate when the next big tech update happens? How do you prevent what computer scientists call bit rot?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, bit rot is the slow deterioration of software and data over time. And Biswas tackles this head-on with what he calls Vision 2050.
Okay, what is that?
He isn't just thinking about the 250th anniversary, he's planning decades ahead.
Yeah.
To prevent bit rot, the archive uses decentralized, distributed redundancy.
Meaning the database isn't just sitting on one vulnerable server in a university basement somewhere.
Exactly. It is mirrored across a global network of academic consortia. They utilize blockchain-like audit trails, cryptographic proofs, to guarantee the data hasn't been corrupted, degraded, or maliciously altered over time.
That's smart. But what about the software obsolescence? Even if the data survives, what if the computer programs required to read it don't exist in 30 years?
That is where Vision 2050 embraces emulation.
Emulation, like playing a vintage 1990s video game on a modern PC.
Exactly like that. But for complex historical databases, they're literally archiving the operating systems themselves. They're creating virtual machines.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so a scholar 50 years from now won't just be staring at a flat spreadsheet of data. They will be able to boot up an emulator and experience the interactive archives, the AI context engines, and the digital tools authentically, exactly as they functioned when they were built in the 2020s.
That is staggering. They are archiving the experience of the technology itself alongside the history it uncovered.
It's visionary, honestly.
So let's bring all this together. We started with a scholar rooted in the deeply humanistic tradition of Bengali poetry and post-colonial struggle. And we followed his journey to becoming the architect of a globally distributed, AI-driven digital archive that fundamentally reevaluates America's 250-year history.
And if you are wondering why this specific project matters to you, beyond just being a cool technological feat, it is because Biswas's work offers a blueprint.
A blueprint for what?
It proves that we do not have to choose between advanced technology and our humanity. AI does not have to erase culture or flatten historical nuance. When it is guided by a humanistic methodology, when it is treated as an empathic collaborator, AI can actually be used to resurrect silenced voices.
Yeah, it can map the hidden contours of history, and it can democratize elite learning for absolutely anyone with an internet connection. It is an incredibly hopeful vision for the future of how we interact with information. And it leaves us with something really fascinating to think about. Biswas used his AI to read the American narrative through a completely different cultural lens, exposing structural blind spots that a domestic perspective naturally missed.
Right.
It makes you wonder, If you could feed the dominant narratives of your own life, your own workplace, or your own culture into an empathic AI, an AI trained on a completely different worldview than your own, what hidden paradoxes, or erased histories, or systemic blind spots would suddenly come to light? What would you finally see if you swapped out your own glasses?
That is a brilliant thought to end on.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives around you, keep learning, and we will catch you next time.